Hello everybody, I'm Captain Mamgen. Now that we have solved problems on day's work, where the position was given to us, initial position was given to us, and the second was that we found out a position with bearing and distance. That type of question which you can expect in day's work, in which we call is doubling the angle at the bows. So now in this question, various courses have been given to me. There's some wind, leeway, then there is a piece of land here which is bearing 4 points, and after some time it's bearing, it's a beam. And we are expected to find out a position and cosine distance. So if you look at it, each case individually, so I've just converted my courses here, compass courses to course, applying the error. So these are my courses steered. Now, wind is always named from the direction it is coming and tends to push the ship away from the direction it is coming. So this ship, instead of doing 256, it will be steering 256, but it will be making good a course of 254 because it's being pushed down. So the course would be 254. At 1600 hours, he's given me the log variation and the course which I have converted it again to two course here. Log at 1600 hours is 54. So log is basically a counter, how much distance you have done. So the distance between 12 and 16 would be the difference between the two logs, and the distance would be 54 miles. In this case, wind is from west northwest, there is no leeway, so I will continue to be making good the course what I'm steering 245, and it will be somewhere here because of the wind. I was pushed down, so instead of being on at this point, I'll be somewhere here. So this is the course made good here, 45. At 2100 hours, again we have altered course to course 210, and the log is 114. So that will give me the distance between the time, that is from 2100 hours to 1600 hours. So the log is 114. The distance done between 1600 and 21 would be 114 minus 54, 60 miles. Now in this case, the wind is from south southwest. You see the direction. It is going to push the ship away up. So instead of making good the true course of 210, I'll be making good the course of 212. And the log there is 154. The course is continuing as 220. Now the distance covered between 21 and 24 is 154 minus 114, which is 40 miles. Now he's asked me to find out the position at 2400 hours, which looking at this, how will I find it out? I don't have any initial position. Second thing what he's asking me is to find out the course and distance made good. That is possible all right once I know all the delat and departures made good along the courses, made good with the known distances. I can always find out my course and distance. So now this total delat and departure are to be calculated on course made good, not on course stayed. So if I get the total course and delat and departure on the courses made good, I can always find out my course and distance by knowing the total delat, delong, departure along the course made good. At 1800 hours, he said the point of land is bearing 4 points on my bows. 4 points is 45 degrees. So that means it's 4 point. That means this angle, what it is making here is 45 degrees. Or we can say that the bearing is 45 degrees off my head. So at 1900 hours, it's a beam, and the log is given to me in both the places. Now, bearings, when we are talking in terms of bearings, bearings are always on course steered, not on course made good. So when I said 4 points here, 45 degrees, that will be on course steered, not on course made good. Similarly here, a beam will be on course steered, course made good. Of course, in this particular case, both the course made good and course steered is the same because the leeway was nil. But in case you have something like this, so it is always the bearings have to be taken on course steered, not on course made good. So the 4-point bearing, when I'm talking about it, is going to be course plus 45 degrees. So in the first case will be 290, and a beam will be course plus 90, that is course steered 245, not the course made good. Now this bearing is basically a position line. I can be anywhere on this position line. To get my position, I have to have second position line or a position circle. In this case, when he gives me this another bearing, what he has given me here, it's being a beam, I can find out my position. But this position which is there will be always on course made good because you are not on the course steered, you are on course made good. So the first bearing is 45 degrees on the bows, 4 points. The second one is a beam that is 90 degrees here. Now this forms a triangle, and then triangle sum of three angles is 180. So the remaining angle is 45, and this turns out to be isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle, the sides are equal. So you can see that the distance traveled between the first bearing and the second bearing, that distance would be the distance of the ship, of the lighthouse or the piece of land. So now once I know the distance off, which is 12 miles here, with the log of 78 and 90, I can use the reverse bearing and distance, and I can find out the position B. This is what we call as doubling the angle at the bows. Now instead of 45 and 90, I can just give you some bearing on this course of 245. If I just told you that a light was bearing 195 degrees, so 195 degrees, it is bearing at certain time. After doing certain amount of distance here, 6 nautical miles, I find the bearing to be 145. So what does this basically mean? When the bearing is 195, it's making an angle of 50 degrees here onto my port side. And similarly, it's making an angle of 100 degrees in my ship side. This is another case of doubling the angle here. From 50, it has become double. You know that the straight line is 180. So this angle is 80. So the remaining angle would be 50, which again, this forms the isosceles triangle, and the distance traversed between these two bearings would be also the distance away from the lighthouse or a piece of land. This is how you find out your distances in case you've been given a question in which it is a case of doubling the angles. And this case, as I said, is simple to find out your course and distance. So this type of a question will have to be done in two parts. First, I'll find out the course and distance, and the course and distance would be along the course made good. And if I can find out the total relat and departure here, I can use this formula and find out my course and distance. second part would be to find out my position. Now he has given me first instant when it is 45 degrees, the second one when it is 90 degrees. Now it is doubling the angle. So whatever the distance I have traversed between the two bearings, and in this question it's 12 miles, that would be the distance of the lighthouse from the ship. So now I know the bearing, I know the distance, I can always find out this position. So now to find out my final position, what I basically require was this bearing, the reverse bearing, and all the departures and delat, what the ship would follow after having confirmed this position of mine. So I won't require what is left behind. So for part 2, my solution would start from here. That's from the reverse bearing and whatever distances I'm doing on the courses now. And as you can see that the distance now between 1900 and 2100 I'm using here, whereas in that case it was right from 1600 to 2100. So this type of a question would have to be done in two parts. One is for finding out your course and distance, and the second would start off from where you can find out the distance away from the object given to you, and whatever is behind that, that really we don't require for our position. So to find out my course and distance, I'll be using my course made good, and if I can get the total delat departure, I get my course and distance. So by just putting up the formula, I get my course and distance made good. So this is the first part of your question. The second part would start off from when it was a beam, that is 1900 hours. Because at 1900 hours, I can find out what is the distance away from the lighthouse. I know what the bearing is, and like the previous one, I can find out the position, initial position. If I am interested, or I will not find the initial position, I'll just find the final position. So this is 45 degrees when it gave me 4 points. Then in 1900, it has given me that it is a beam. Question is of doubling the angle at the bows. As I said, that the distance covered between these two bearings would be the distance off. So at 1900 hours, I know now the bearing as well as the distance off, and I can find out this position if I have to. Or as we discussed earlier, we need not find out this and use this as your first bearing and use the rest of the courses and distances to find out the final position. As he has not asked me the initial position, so I'll really not bother about finding out this position. And after this, we will continue on 245, but here the log was 90 at 19, it is 214. So now the distances have changed here, 245. On course 245, it has become 24 miles. And of course, the last course was already calculated by you. So what remains for you to calculate in this is the reverse bearing and this part of it. This you have already calculated. So there will be certain things you have already calculated which you can make use of and add this what is remaining, because here 245 the distance has changed, so delay departure is changing here, and this part of the bearing. So what I will do is I'll take the reverse bearing. It was 335 was the bearing, reverse bearing. And I use that as the first course. Yeah, and find out my delayed departure. And I can find out my position of my lighthouse using this delayed and departure. The normal way with finding out my mean lat, getting my D long, and then finding out my DR position at 2400 hours. Now, this type of a question, if you have, you'll have to do it in two ways, two parts. One is to just find out your course and distance, in which the whole sum is being used. And the second part, find out your position. You'll start off with where you have been able to get your position. That is when you got the distance off and use the reverse bearing and distance here. That's the first course. And then the remaining, what was remaining in the course of 19 to 21. So the distance has changed here from 60, it has become 24. And this 21 you have already calculated. So this is how you will find out your position when the position is given to you somewhere in the middle of the question or doubling up of angle at the bows. Thank you very much.